Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for providing us with the rather comprehensive overview. I'll ask you a series of questions, but I'll be very brief. First of all, you mentioned secure flight. I'm delighted you mentioned it after I don't know how many questions that we have submitted over the years. I'm glad you share our concern, because as far as I can see, data are being transferred without any legal base. We've flagged this up with the Commission many times, and I'm curious to see what we're going to do. Secondly, Canada PNR. I'm not really sure what to say anymore. This is becoming a joke. I mean, either there is a legal base for the transfer of data, then we don't need to negotiate, or there is not, and then we've been in a situation of illegality for I don't know how many years by now. And I don't understand why it needs to take 2.5 years to negotiate an agreement. Thirdly, one thing that you may have mentioned, but then it escaped me, or maybe you didn't mention it, and that is the so-called TFTS, as it's called now, which I don't much like, as you know, it's not a big secret. And I would really like to know how those proposals, forthcoming proposals, relate to the implementation of the so-called SWIFT agreement, which seems to be rather unsatisfactory. And that brings me to my fourth point, and that is the issue of transparency, which is strictly speaking not your remit. I mean, not only have negotiations on the review of the regulation for public access to documents have collapsed, I find that the current regulation is not functioning very well, because as a parliament we are basically not enabled to exercise any meaningful scrutiny of the implementation of the agreement. We reluctantly agreed to endorsing the agreement. Then we find there is a report that the summary of which seems to suggest that basically nobody cares about the agreement and all the data are being transferred to the Americans anyway. And the only leverage that we had as a parliament was that we said, but we will exercise very close monitoring of the agreement. That's always the magic phrase. Whenever this parliament doesn't feel like standing up against something, we say, we'll accept it, but we'll closely monitor. We cannot closely monitor if we do not get access to the information. And then finally, and I'm sure that you have a lot of sympathy for this because you were one of the driving forces behind the original regulation on transparency. And then finally, on data retention, I'm really curious to hear how we're going to proceed with that, because as far as I can see, I have not seen any convincing evidence of the usefulness, never mind necessity, of the directive. It's been contested in many member states. It's before the ECJ. Just yesterday there was a report in the Netherlands again by, I think, the Ministry of Justice this time, that demonstrates that the police forces are freely browsing through the databases with complete disregard for the rules. So I really don't see why we should hold on to a directive which has no demonstrated usefulness and has many demonstrated disadvantages, and I would like to know how we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Mathieu, finalement.
Merci, Monsieur.